In the past, rewriting narratives required large teams of propagandists who had to carefully craft alternative wording for every story. It took time, coordination, and human labor. Today, with AI systems, this process can be done instantly. A single prompt can generate dozens of alternative narratives, all aligned with the ideological language preferred by the Chinese Communist Party. In other words, propaganda can now be automated and scaled, and the same technique can be used in reverse, not just to defend authoritarian regimes, but also to attack political figures inside democratic societies. For example, AI systems can take a policy that is objectively beneficial to societies, such as strengthen national defense, and then rewrite it in ways designed to provoke fear or anger among specific audiences. Instead of discussing the policy itself, the narrative shifts to emotional framing. A defense budget increase might be reframed as America is forcing Taiwan to pay for protection, just like mafia, or Taiwan is being drained financially to serve US interests. These claims often rely on emotional language rather than evidence. Last week, we talked about how OpenAI revealed the Chinese influence networks have been attempting to exploit large language models like ChatGPT for large-scale online influence operations. And these operations are not just targeting Taiwan. They're also targeting international political figures. For example, not long ago, Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi Sanae suddenly became the target of coordinated waves of online criticism, not only inside Japan, but also across social media networks discussing Taiwan and international politics. When you see these sudden spikes of political narratives online, they're often not spontaneous public opinion. In many cases, these are coordinated information operations. Today, let me explain something important in very simple terms: how the Chinese Communist Party is attempting to extract and replicate American AI capabilities, what techniques they are currently using, and most importantly, how democratic societies should respond. Stealing the reasoning style of Western AI. Chinese influence operations are not only stealing technology, they also want to extract something more subtle: the communication style and reasoning patterns of Western AI systems. In the past, Chinese propaganda operations relied heavily on human 50-cent army commentators, paid online trolls who flooded forums and social media. But these human operators often failed because they didn't understand the cultural context of the societies they were targeting. The language sounded unnatural, and their arguments felt forced. Their posts were often easy to identify as propaganda, but artificial intelligence changes that completely. According to investigations reported by both Anthropic and OpenAI, at least 3 Chinese AI companies, DeepSeek, Moonshot AI, and Minimax, have been systematically querying Western AI systems on a massive scale. Researchers observed more than 24,000 fraudulent accounts sending over 16 million prompts to systems like Claude and ChatGPT. The purpose was systematic extraction of model behavior. These accounts would ask questions, collect the answers, and then analyze how the AI produced responses that appeared balanced, rational, and neutral. But at the same time, they tested something else: how to subtly embed Chinese nationalist narrative inside responses that still appear reasonable to Western audiences. In other words, they're attempting to merge Xi Jinping's ideological narratives with persuasive communication style of Western AI models. Once enough of these responses are collected, the generated data can be used to train what researchers call a teacher model. The teacher model can then generate massive volumes of synthetic text that imitates how the people speak online. Those synthetic outputs then become training material for new student models, and those models can continue evolving, essentially creating an infinite feedback loop of AI-generated propaganda content. To understand how powerful this technique can be, let's look at some simple examples. Imagine a report saying the Chinese government demolished citizens' homes without their consent. In propaganda language, that can be rewritten as stubborn citizens are obstructing urban development that aims to improve the quality of life. Or, when citizens petition the government and then suddenly disappear, the original description might be rights activists were detained and disappeared after criticizing authorities. But the rewritten version becomes violent troublemakers were arrested in order to maintain social stability. The facts may not change very much, but the framing completely changes how the audience interprets the event. In the past, rewriting narratives like this required large teams of propagandists who had to carefully craft alternative wording for every story. It took time, coordination, and human labor. Today, with AI systems, this process can be done instantly. A single prompt can generate dozens of alternative narratives, all aligned with the ideological language preferred by the Chinese Communist Party. In other words, propaganda can now be automated and scaled, and the same technique can be used in reverse, not just to defend authoritarian regimes, but also to attack political figures inside democratic societies. For example, AI systems can take a policy that is objectively beneficial to societies, such as strengthen national defense, and then rewrite it in ways designed to provoke fear or anger among specific audiences. Instead of discussing the policy itself, the narrative shifts to emotional framing. A defense budget increase might be reframed as America is forcing Taiwan to pay for protection, just like mafia, or Taiwan is being drained financially to serve US interests. These claims often rely on emotional language rather than evidence, but they are extremely effective at shaping perception. Similarly, when a political leader takes responsibility for a crisis and apologizes publicly, something that would normally be seen as accountable leadership, the narrative can be flipped. Instead of responsibility, the rewritten narrative might say, if they did nothing wrong, why are they apologizing? In the past, these narratives had to be invented manually by political operatives. But with AI, thousands of variations can now be generated within seconds. These narratives can then be distributed through large networks of fake accounts on social media, creating the illusion that everyone is talking about it. Once the topic starts gaining attention, short videos, memes, and YouTube channels can amplify it even further. And when real people start responding, arguing, sharing, reacting emotionally, the platform algorithm detects the engagement and begin pushing the topic even more widely. This creates a feedback loop. A small coordinated narrative can gradually grow into what appears to be a major public controversy. And with each wave of algorithmic amplification, the emotional intensity increases. Frustration spreads, anger spreads, and the original disinformation becomes harder and harder to separate from genuine public debate. The three operational patterns of AI-driven influence campaigns. So, if we step back and look at the bigger picture, what exactly are these AI systems being used for? When we compare multiple investigations from Graphica, from reports published by Anthropic and OpenAI, and from research by Google Threat Analysis Group and the cybersecurity firm Mandiant, we start to see a very consistent pattern. Across different platforms and different countries, the operational behavior looks remarkably similar. And broadly speaking, these influence campaigns show three major characteristics. First, evolution in both quality and quantity. At the beginning of this video, I mentioned something called spamouflage. This term refers to earlier Chinese influence campaigns that relied on massive volumes of low-quality posts. In the past, these messages were relatively easy to identify. The language often looked awkward, translations were poor, and many accounts posted identical content repeatedly. But artificial intelligence has changed that. Now, AI can rewrite messages in multiple languages with native-level fluency. Posts written in English, Spanish, or French can now look very similar to something a real person might write. This dramatically increases the difficulty for ordinary users to detect coordinated propaganda. In other words, AI has transformed propaganda operations from low-quality mass spam into something much closer to human-like online discussion. Second, integration of AI-generated content. The second characteristic is the integration of multiple types of AI-generated media. You may have already noticed this phenomenon online. Many fake accounts now use AI-generated profile pictures that look like real people, but actually do not exist. But it goes much further than that. AI voice synthesis can now produce fake radio broadcasts or narrated videos. Some operations even create entire fake experts, fake news anchors, fake doctors, fake lawyers, all generated with AI. For example, in Taiwan, there have been cases where elderly viewers watched online health programs featuring what appeared to be a professional doctor, but later investigations revealed that the doctor did not exist at all. The entire persona had been generated by artificial intelligence. This kind of operation becomes extremely powerful when combined with social media distribution. Because once a fake expert appears credible, the audience may never question the source. Third, meme warfare and reputation erosion. The third pattern is something that looks very simple but is actually extremely effective, and that is the mass production of sarcastic memes and ridicule-based narratives. Memes are low-cost, easy to produce, and highly shareable, but politically they serve an important psychological function. Instead of debating policies seriously, memes shift the conversation into something different. They create the impression that everyone is laughing at this person. Once that perception spreads, people stop evaluating the actual arguments. Instead, the target becomes someone who should not be taken seriously. Over time, this creates what researchers call reputational erosion. Even if no specific accusation is proven, the audience develops a vague feeling that something must be wrong with this person. For politicians, this can influence voting behavior. Voters may avoid supporting someone simply because they feel uncertain about them. For journalists, scholars, or opinion leaders, reputational erosion can destroy their credibility. Once the public loses trust, their influence disappears. And beyond individual targets, this strategy has a broader political effect. It creates democratic fatigue. People start saying things like, all politicians are the same, politics is dirty, everyone is corrupt anyway. When public trust collapses like this, democratic participation declines. And that makes political manipulation even easier, because when the ordinary citizens become apathetic, organized political networks can dominate elections. Now, if you look closely at how these campaigns operate, you'll notice something interesting. When the Chinese Communist Party targets a political figure, a religious group, or a specific policy debate, the attacks usually do not appear as one massive propaganda wave. Instead, they follow a different pattern. The strategy is what we might call low-impact but high-annoyance operation. The objective is to slowly create a sense that something about this person or this issue is always controversial. Over time, this produces political fatigue. People begin to feel that the issue is constantly surrounded by problems, accusations, and arguments, and eventually many citizens simply disengage from the discussion. Under this framework, influence operations targeting open societies usually operate through several layers. The first layer is what researchers call fake media infrastructure. According to investigations by the social media analysis firm Graphica, researchers identified dozens of suspicious domains operating as fake news outlets. Some of these websites were designed to imitate well-known international media organizations. For example, certain domains were structured to resemble outlets like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, or the Guardian. To ordinary readers, these sites can appear legitimate at first glance. But their purpose is not being engaged in journalism. Their purpose is to distribute politically targeted narratives while appearing credible. In addition to impersonating existing media outlets, some operations create entirely new media networks. One example identified in cybersecurity investigations is a network known as Glassbridge. Glassbridge is reportedly linked to several Chinese companies, including Shanghai Huaxin Technology, Times Newswire, Durin Bridge, and Shenzhen Bowen Media. Together, these organizations operate hundreds of website and news distribution services that appear to be independent media outlets. According to research published by Google's Threat Analysis Group and the cybersecurity firm Mandiant, these sites operate in a highly coordinated manner. They publish articles promoting pro-China narratives while pretending to be independent local news organizations. And they target audiences across multiple regions, including Eastern Europe, the Middle East, Africa, Asia, and the United States. By disguising propaganda as local journalism, influence operations can insert narratives into the information environment that looks like legitimate reporting. Second layer, AI-assisted content generation and algorithm amplification. The second layer involves the use of artificial intelligence to produce content and manipulate platform algorithms. This is where the AI techniques we discussed earlier become extremely important. AI can rapidly generate articles, comments, memes, and videos designed to provoke emotional reactions. The goal is not necessarily to convince people directly. Instead, it is to trigger engagement. When real users begin responding, liking, commenting, arguing, social media algorithms detect rising interaction levels. And the platforms then begin promoting the content automatically. In other words, the operation relies on human reactions to activate the algorithm. At that point, the narrative spreads far beyond the original network that created it. Sometimes the amplification becomes so large that mainstream media outlets begin reporting on the controversy itself. And once this happens, the narrative has successfully entered the public conversation. Third layer, transnational pressure and real-world harassment. The third layer moves beyond the digital world. It involves forms of pressure that can extend into real life. A common tactic begins with coordinated fake accounts entering comment sections and deliberately escalated emotional tensions. These accounts often post insults, distortions, or extreme accusations designed to provoke a reaction. Their objective is not to persuade you, but just to trigger high engagement with the content. Once someone responds emotionally, their comments can then be screenshot, selectively edited, and redistributed on other platforms. These screenshots may then be used to label the person as a foreign agent, a paid propagandist, or a source of hatred or misinformation. By framing the individual as a dangerous or suspicious actor, the operation shifts public perception before the person even has a chance to explain themselves. This process is often followed by coordinated mass reporting. Large numbers of accounts simultaneously report the target for violating platform rules, such as harassment or misinformation. Because moderation systems rely heavily on automated signals, these coordinated reports can trigger penalties, such as reduced visibility, temporary account restrictions, or even suspension. In other words, platform moderation systems themselves become weapons in the information war. For political figures, journalists, or activists, the harassment may extend even further. Negative labels and accusations can be repeated across multiple platforms, including Chinese social media platforms like Douyin or Xiaohongshu. As these narratives spread, search algorithms begin associating the person's name with negative keywords. This gradually locks the target into a permanent negative reputation frame. And in some cases, particularly for Chinese dissidents or activists living abroad, online harassment can escalate into real-world intimidation. Families inside China may face pressure from authorities. Activists overseas may encounter harassment or surveillance. What begins as a digital influence campaign can eventually become transnational repression. So the question now becomes, if these influence operations are becoming more sophisticated with artificial intelligence, what can ordinary people actually do about it? How do we prevent hostile actors from successfully using AI and social media algorithms to manipulate public opinion? The first thing we need to understand is something very important. Most of these operations are not trying to convince you. Their primary objective is not persuasion. The goal is to provoke you. They want you to become angry. They want you to respond emotionally. Because once you react impulsively, the algorithm begins doing the rest of the work by itself. Social media algorithms do not understand politics. They do not evaluate truth. They only measure signals like how quickly people react, how many comments are generated, how long users stay on a post, and how intense the emotional responses are. So when people argue, fight, and react emotionally in comment sections, the algorithm interprets that as high engagement content and pushes it to even more users. That is exactly what these influence operations are trying to trigger. So how should we respond? There are three simple strategies. First, don't argue, block. If you manage a public page, or if you're a public figure or opinion leader, the simplest strategy is often the most effective. Don't argue with fake accounts. Block them. Every engagement gives them exactly what they want, more engagement signals for the algorithm. By removing them immediately, you deny them the fuel they need to amplify their narrative. Second, occupy the algorithm. For ordinary users who do not run large pages, there is still something very important you can do. Think of it as occupying the algorithm. Instead of responding to suspicious accounts or disinformation posts, focus your engagement on credible information sources. Share reliable reporting, comment under serious analysis, add context, data, and thoughtful discussion. Like and support high-quality content, like mine. When enough users interact constructively like this, the algorithm begins to recognize those discussions as the dominant engagement signal. In other words, you help the algorithm prioritize serious conversations instead of manufactured outrage. Third, warn others without feeding the trolls. Sometimes you will encounter comments that are so extreme or so misleading that people need to be warned. In those situations, there is a better method than direct confrontation. Take a screenshot, or address your response to other real users instead of replying directly to the troll. By doing this, you create a new discussion thread, rather than increasing the visibility of the disinformation account. The algorithm then detects that a new conversation is forming without rewarding the original malicious post. Many people also ask, what can technology companies and democratic governments do to prevent hostile actors from using artificial intelligence? This is currently one of the biggest challenges facing the tech industry. Several solutions are already being explored. One approach is something called response watermarking. This technique embeds subtle statistical patterns inside AI-generated responses. These patterns are invisible to users but can allow researchers to detect when large volumes of AI outputs are being collected and reused to train other models. Another method involves canary strings, deliberately inserting traceable markers into training data. If those markers later appear inside another AI model's outputs, it can prove that the model was trained using stolen data. There are also ongoing efforts to integrate value alignment directly into AI systems rather than treating safety as an external add-on. By embedding democratic values into the core reasoning architecture of models, developers hope to make it much harder for authoritarian actors to extract and repurpose them. And of course, there are also hardware restrictions, such as export controls on advanced AI chips. Without sufficient computing power, it becomes extremely difficult to train large-scale models. The reality is that we are entering a world where humans and artificial intelligence will increasingly coexist. And inevitably, hostile actors will attempt to use these tools to infiltrate and manipulate democratic societies. But technology alone doesn't determine the outcome. What ultimately matters is how people respond. Authoritarian regimes rely on manipulation, intimidation, and the spread of confusion. But history shows us something important. In the long run, lies are fragile. Truth has a way of surfacing, especially when people are willing to defend it. So the most important thing we can do is continue sharing reliable information, support responsible journalism, and hold our governments accountable for protecting democratic institutions. Because in the end, defending the information space is not just the responsibility of governments and technology companies. It is something all of us can participate in. Thank you for watching. If you like the video, please press like, subscribe, and share. And remember that freedom is not free.